Friedrich Nietzsche probably has the most influence of any philosopher on particularly defining the philosophical milieu of today. In terms of philosophers that have had monumental importance, we can probably say Plato, and thus Socrates, Aristotle, Nietzsche. Maybe we could put in there Descartes, Hegel. Those would probably be the five really important philosophers. And Nietzsche is just particularly important because you can link most, if not all, of the big postmodernists back to Nietzsche, and you can find their ideas bred into his philosophy. You can find Foucault's observations about madness and it being contained. You can find Baudrillard's stuff on death being contained and about social reproduction. You can find Deleuze and Guattari's very preaching of the earth, anti-deterministic, kind of explosive philosophy, and many more. And as such, I think reading Nietzsche is really important for getting some headway on these philosophers. And it's important to know a little bit about his background as well as where he's going from here. But we're going to be looking at the first part of Spoke Zarathustra by Nietzsche, and I might make this a four-parter and do a lecture for each part. I'm not really sure. But regardless, this is just going to kind of be informal. I'll be reading and we'll be talking about several different parts. Now, Nietzsche is responding mainly to, we could say, Socrates is one of his biggest points of contention, but in terms of kind of recent people, Hegel and Schopenhauer. And Hegel is very systematic, very absolute. He thinks the transcendent is, that's one of the most important part of his philosophies of using self-consciousness to come to absolute spirit and basically rationalize everything. And Schopenhauer too had a lot of influence on Nietzsche with regards to the will and also bringing in Buddhism into philosophy or into Western philosophy. And Nietzsche has a lot of striking things about him, principally of which is his statements about God. We're going to look at his spot where this is the second time. He does it first in Die fröhliche Wissenschaft, the gay science or the happy science. And he does it again here where he proclaims the death of God. A very complex topic that I definitely don't have enough scholarly, I want to read Deleuze's book on Nietzsche. I want to read Heidegger's book on Nietzsche, probably Walter Kaufmann's, a few others. But nevertheless, we're just going to be looking at these defining parts of his philosophy, his statements about God, his preaching of the earth, his kind of post-humanism, crossing boundaries, explosive philosophy. I have up on my wall right here a poster of Nietzsche with a quote that says, "What I understand by philosopher, a terrible explosive in the presence of which everything is in danger," which is just, for me, Nietzsche's a real idol that really got me into philosophy. I had read Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy. I was like, okay, this is kind of a cool, abstract kind of thought experiment, talking with lady philosophy and all this. But I remember during COVID, I picked up Thus Spoke Zarathustra after I had gotten my COVID vaccine, and I remember seeing God is Dead, and I was like, man, this is so cool, because it's just, Nietzsche's undeniably radical, and he's important both for people of any religious identification. So with that said, let's just get right into the text. So As we open up into the prologue, this is perhaps just one of the most monumentous occasions in philosophy, in my opinion. It's extremely lucid, and it defines much of Nietzsche's themes. And thus Spoke Zarathustra is built around this character, Zarathustra, who is not necessarily we could talk about the historicity, but Zarathustra is a religious figure of Zoroastrianism. He's also known as Zoroaster. I'm not sure which name is more prevalent for Zoroastrians today. But it's one of the oldest religions that still is functioning and alive today. And Nietzsche is basically trying to do, he was going to call his last treatise The Revaluation of All Values. And that's a famously tragic case of Nietzsche's philosophy being kind of put together in a very disingenuous way after his death to make him seem like he was holding positions he wasn't necessarily. But Nietzsche is all about attacking values at their core. Nietzsche is very much a relativist. We can say that straightforwardly. He's relativistic with regards to morality, but also with regards to subjectivity, the place of the subject in the world. He wants to, similar to Deleuze and Guattari, he wants to come up with a philosophy of the encounter, an encounter with the world. It's very in der Welt sein, in the world being, as Heidegger would say. And Heidegger definitely was radically indebted to Nietzsche. And there are a lot of earthly themes in the book. It's a very confusing work because it's so metaphorical compared to like Human All Too Human, which is just very straightforward aphorisms, a very easy work to read. Of course, there's some difficult stuff in there. I love the last aphorism. It's so good. But this work is profoundly confusing sometimes just because of all the metaphors he's using. But really, he's trying to connect a lot of literary themes. He's trying to replicate the walking preacher kind of archetype of Jesus and the Buddha and Zoroaster or Zarathustra, the character. And he alludes to several different themes of Christianity and other religions and various other kind of just archetypal stuff. But he's really trying to attack things at their core, which is just so explosive and fun. But Zarathustra, he leaves his home at 30 and he goes into the mountains to live in this cave and just kind of ruminate and be in communion with nature. And he stays there for 10 years and he's fine with it. And then finally his heart changes and he rises one morning at dawn and he speaks thus to the sun. He says, "You great star, what would your happiness be if you had not those for whom you shine? For 10 years you've climbed here to my cave. You would have wearied of your light and of this journey without me, my eagle and my serpent. But we awaited you every morning, took from you your overflow and blessed you for it. Behold, I am weary of my wisdom, like the bee that has gathered too much honey. I need hands outstretched to take it. I want to give away and distribute until the wise have once more become happy in their folly and the poor happy in their riches. Therefore, I must descend into the depths, as you do in the evening when you go behind the sea, and bring light also to the underworld, you exuberant star. Like you, I must go under, as men say to whom I shall descend. Bless me then, you tranquil eye, that can behold even an all too great happiness without envy. Bless the cup that wants to overflow, that the waters may flow golden from him and carry everywhere the reflection of your joy. Behold, this cup wants to become empty again, and Zarathustra wants to be man again. Thus Zarathustra began to go under." And going under is translating the German Untergehen, which can mean perishing, dying, literally going under, but it also has kind of the paradoxical meaning of regeneration, almost the returning to one's roots to spring up. It's kind of related to Aufgeben, which is a big term in Hegel's philosophy, which is kind of his term for sublation. It takes two moments that are in conflict with one another and synthesizes them, both passing them, but also taking their contents with it into a higher determination. And that's really what Nietzsche's trying to do, is he's trying to cross these boundaries. He doesn't want to, Zarathustra is tired of just sitting in the wilderness. He needs hands outstretched, and he needs an encounter, not just with the wilderness, but with people too. And there are a lot of links, for example, talking about the eagle and the serpent. The eagle is this, think about the eagle as the U.S.'s national animal or whatever, and it symbolizes freedom and going over, and kind of going over as opposed to going under, which is a big binary in this work. And then also there's the serpent, which has connotations of maybe connivingness from like the serpent in Genesis, but also the serpent is representative of knowledge. And Zarathustra, he says, I want to descend into the depths as you do in the evening when you go behind the sea, and bring light also to the underworld. He wants to pass these boundaries, and he's really intrigued by the fact that nature is not value-laden. It's cyclical, and as he says, the sun can behold even an all too great happiness without envy, which is to say it bestows this happiness and it's engaged with human happiness. But of course, it's not emotional. It's simply an encounter that is not value-laden. It's just presentness. And as such, this represents a great theme throughout, which is to go past these transcendent kind of values of the heavens and the beyond to get to an understanding of humans as world-grounded. And as Zarathustra comes down from the mountain, we have the famous encounter with this old saint who has basically spent his time in the forest. He says, I loved men far too well. Now I love God. Men I do not love. Man is for me too imperfect a thing. Love of man would kill me. And he basically says that he wants to be a bear among bears, a bird among birds, and he wants to be in communion with nature. And the saint just says that now he just makes songs and he sings his hymns to God, and he laughs and he weeps and he hums. And he asks Zarathustra, what is he going to bring him as a gift? And the text says, when Zarathustra had heard these words, he bowed to the saint and said, what could I have to give you? Let me rather hurry away, lest I take something from you. And thus they parted from one another, the old one and the man, laughing just like two schoolboys laugh. But when Zarathustra was alone, he spoke thus to his heart. Could it then be possible this old saint in his forest has not yet heard of it, that God is dead? Which, this really gets at the heart of, is Nietzsche an atheist or not? Because if you're taking this statement literally, that means he believed in God existing at one point, but he's now dead. I think that is an incorrect. I think it's a far too literal take, considering the metaphorical nature of this entire text. If you just read it, it is so clear that is not what Nietzsche is saying. He's talking about the death of these transcendental concepts, and God is principal among that. He thinks that this belief in God is something that we have surpassed, both in the sense that he thinks it is untenable to maintain the same belief in God that used to be Belief in God used to be something that profoundly grounded people's actions, and their ways of life was profoundly connected to their belief in God. Whereas at this point in 1883, the world is becoming increasingly secular, and people just don't believe in God the same way they do. And I think Nietzsche is trying to say that, is it really a belief in God anymore if you're not showing that through your actions, if we are shifting over to this focus on natural sciences and stuff like that? And I mean, Nietzsche thinks this is a good thing. He thinks we should be learning to preach of the earth, as he says, and we should be focused on getting away from these transcendental concepts because they naturally entail a debasement of all that is worldly. I mean, you hear that in religious circles, of avoiding worldly desires. Nietzsche thinks that what is virtuous is essentially what aids in the acquisition of power, and is also a method for overcoming the human. And earlier in the encounter, when Zarathustra speaks, he said, "Did I speak of love? I bring men a gift." So he doesn't love men either, just like the saint. Rather, he is coming to bring knowledge, not because he's a humanist. In this sense, he's radically different from Ludwig Feuerbach, who comes before him. And Feuerbach actually inspires quite a bit of Nietzsche's philosophy, because for Feuerbach, God is an emanation of humanity's deepest desires for love and connection, and for an objective existence of himself outside of himself. And thus he projects that as something with which he can ground a law, which is really his own personal law, as something real. And in that sense, Nietzsche's playing on that idea that transcendental terms are despotic because they are going to presuppose how we ought to interpret this world, and that certain things will be lacking or immoral. Nietzsche's not too concerned with that. He is much more concerned about getting back to an encounter with the world that focuses on here and now. And Zarathustra, after this encounter, comes down to a town, and he finds these people, and there's a tightrope walker who's about to do his act. And Zarathustra starts to teach of the Übermensch. He says man is something that shall be overcome. And this is really crucial because, like I was talking about with Feuerbach is a humanist. Feuerbach thinks that religion is something important, that it represents an impulse we should follow, but that we should ground in humanistic values and human pursuits to overcome what we feel to be our limitations, and thus the beyond of which we objectify as God. Whereas Nietzsche thinks that we should be overcoming mankind, that we should not be reducing ourselves or strapping ourselves down to mankind necessarily, but we should be engaged in this encounter with one another. I mean, Zarathustra is going to start getting followers, kind of like Jesus, and this idea of the Übermensch, the overman or the superman, there's kind of a big scholarly debate about which one is the right term, and maybe it was a good idea for the translator of this to just leave it as Übermensch. But the important idea is, I mean, really, it's posthumanism. It's to go over man, to be beyond man, in the sense that one is able to take what they will from mankind, but get rid of all the things that hold us back, the moralisms, the crowd mentality. Nietzsche is very antisocial in this sense because he thinks that state formations and stuff like this is this is holding us down and keeping us from being radical and, like Deleuze and Guattari would say, nomadic. And I think we can definitely see traces of this love of nomadism bred into the text. He says, I beseech you, my brothers, remain true to the earth, and do not believe those who speak to you of otherworldly hopes. They are poison mixers, whether they know it or not. They are despisers of life, themselves the decaying and poisoned, of whom the earth is weary. So away with them. Once the sin against God was the greatest sin, but God died, and those sinners died with him. To sin against the earth is now the most dreadful sin, and to esteem the entrails of the unknowable higher than the meaning of the earth. And in a sense, we can see he's trying to overcome the earth too. I mean, he says now the most dreadful sin is to kind of encroach upon the earth. And in this sense, he wants us to avoid these transcendental ideas of God because it carries with it this idea of sin as something objective and leads to poison mixers, as he said, this despising of the life here in favor of the hereafter. Nietzsche's like, no, let's focus on the life here, but not to idolize this life, but rather to transform it and approach it on the terms that are actually here. I think he probably just thinks these transcendental terms are unnecessary, but in a sense, so is the earth here upon which we tread, that it is the foundation of our metaphysics, but it is also not the limit of these metaphysics. He says, the hour in which even your happiness becomes loathsome to you, and so also your reason and virtue. And he's clearly just trying to get past, contra Hegel, Hegelianism is essentially reason-based. Hegel says that reason is this propeller of Weltgeschichte, world history, kind of taking itself forward. And this entails with it, certain virtuous ideas. Hegel's talking about these world historical persons that carry us into new millenniums. And Nietzsche likes that a little bit. He likes these breaking points, really, in Deleuze and Guattari's language, these deterritorializations, these moments where the territory is irrevocably altered by something that just breaks through. And because of that, Nietzsche wants us to become happy in our folly, as he said before, and really get beyond these ideas of good and evil. He says, how weary I am of my good and my evil. Nietzsche just sees moralism as one of our biggest problems. He says, the hour when you say, what good is my justice? I do not see that I am flame and fuel. The just, however, are flame and fuel. Justice is the flame and fuel that brings out war and conflict. And Nietzsche's not anti-conflict. He does think conflict is important there's conflict in nature. So if it's in nature, it's going to be important for Nietzsche. But I think his problem is that this is an unnecessary fuel. He says, it is not your sin, it is your stinginess that cries to heaven. Your very thrift in sin cries to heaven. Which is to say, we are, in a sense, taking the things we dislike, turning them into sin, and creating this stinginess that necessitates this cry for heaven, this beyond where all my desires will be realized. And in a sense, just as Feuerbach, he's like, this is frankly a selfish concept to loathe this life and loathe the worldly and debase the worldly and really eliminate the possibility for real creativity in this life in the pursuit of a hereafter. So Zarathustra is still speaking to these people before the tightroper comes on, and he says, man is a rope stretched between the animal and the Übermensch, a rope over an abyss. A dangerous crossing, a dangerous on the way, a dangerous looking back, a dangerous trembling and halting. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. What is lovable in man is that he is an overgoing and a going under. I love those that do not know how to live except by going under, for they are those who go over. I love those who do not first seek a reason behind the stars for going under and being sacrifices, but sacrifice themselves to the earth, that the earth may someday become that of the Übermensch. And this is where I really start to see the losing Guattari coming out in Nietzsche. The Übermensch is essentially rhizomatic. It is this assemblage that breaks past possibilities. The Übermensch is always the horizon in front. It's that impetus to creativity. And in between man and the Übermensch is an abyss. And Nietzsche wants us to live in the abyss. The important part is that Nietzsche's philosophy is about becoming and not being. It's about action, not stability, and it's inherently dynamic. And it rings similar to Deleuze and Guattari talking about living on the edge in 1,000 plateaus, that what is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. He is this becoming and not teleological, but active, explosive, and present force that Nietzsche is trying to see what's going to happen if we try not to contain man. If we try to simply live by going under in the sense of coming into contact with the earth, instead of trying to go over first and becoming the Übermensch first. Nietzsche thinks if we want to get to this highest point of humanity, then we have to go under to do that. And we need not seek a horizon first. That's the teleological point that he is trying to get rid of. I mean, deep into Aristotle's politics is that the right thing to do is that which is in accordance with one's duty, and one's duty is to treat things as they are meant to be treated, that something has a teleological purpose for why it is the way it is ahead of time. And Nietzsche's like, no. First, you have to sacrifice yourself to the earth, and then the earth itself, as he says, will become the Übermensch. That this encounter with the earth will elevate life in this process of creativity. And Nietzsche is constantly over this abyss, trying to talk about virtue. He says, I love him who makes his virtue his addiction and his catastrophe. Thus, for the sake of his virtue, he wants to live on and to live no more. I love him who does not want too many virtues. One virtue is more of a virtue than two, because it is more of a noose on which his catastrophe can hang. Which is to say, virtue is always in this liminal space where it represents the horizon to live on, the driving force that drives action, but also, paradoxically, that which holds one back to principle-based thinking that is the very essence of state formations and the law with a capital L that is really anti-Nietzschean. He says, I love him who chastens his God because he loves his God, for he must perish of the wrath of his God. Which is to say, again, he's breaking these boundaries where God is this transcendental term, but rather with the death of God, the earth becomes God, and thus to chasten the earth, to encounter it in whatever manner one needs, not only exaltation of the earth, but also debasement of the earth, not getting too stuck on one kind of value judgment. This is going to turn the earth into the Übermensch, as he says. And the star is a big piece of imagery in Nietzsche's philosophy because it represents for him, stars in nucleosynthesis, stars are explosive and they have this blinding effect, kind of like the blinding effect that happens when one comes out of Plato's cave. He says, I tell you, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. I tell you, you still have chaos in yourselves. Alas, there comes the time when man will no longer give birth to a star. Alas, there comes the time of the most despicable man, who can no longer despise himself. Behold, I show you the last man. What is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is a star? So asks the last man, and he blinks. The earth has become small, and on it he hops, the last man who makes everything small. His species is ineradicable, like that of the flea. The last man lives the longest. We have invented happiness, say the last man, and blink. They have left the regions where it was hard to live, for one needs warmth. One still loves one's neighbor and rubs against him, for one needs warmth. Becoming sick and becoming suspicious are sinful to them. One proceeds carefully. And really we can see the postmodern analysis slipping in here. And to me, it feels very much like Baudrillard, in the sense that he speaks of this point in which mankind loses this encounter with reality. He says that we have to embrace this chaotic mentality. I mean, we could think of this as the mentality embodied by schizophrenia for Deleuze-Guattari. It is a mentality that refuses to stay rule-bound. And Nietzsche speaks of the point of this being closed off when man becomes the last man. He becomes eternal, but precisely by being eternally closed off. He becomes an eternal form that, as probably Baudrillard would say, is just reproduced over and over. He talks about the earth becoming small, and that you just hop on it and make everything small, and that this last man is ineradicable, and he lives the longest. This just feels like the modern day, where we feel like we are ineradicable, like we own nature, and all this trying to increase life expectancy. But like Baudrillard says, this drive to, right to life kind of stuff and enhancing life expectancy, it's all to manufacture when one ought to die on someone else's terms other than yours. And Nietzsche is going to talk about that a little bit later, about what it means to have the proper death. He talks about inventing happiness, and the last men say this, which is to say they feel that they have come upon happiness as something that they have invented, but that now has been sedimented and stratified. And this is what Nietzsche doesn't want. That virtue, just like any sense of territory for Deleuze-Guattari, is just a point of springing up, and you use it as a springboard, as a chance to change things. And this sounds like Foucault too, because he says becoming sick and being suspicious are sinful to them. One proceeds carefully. So suddenly what becomes the most impeding to the last man is sickness and suspiciousness. Sickness because it gets past this idea that, we've reached eternal life and, we have this long life. But it's like when it comes to the sick, and this could be the mad too, they must be contained. And so too the suspicious, that which might destroy these filiative boundaries, are essentially covered up. He says, no shepherd and one herd. Everyone wants the same. Everyone is the same. Whoever feels different goes willingly into the madhouse. Formerly all the world was insane, say the subtlest of them and blink. One is clever and knows all that has happened, so there is no end of derision. And we can really see the birth of madness for Nietzsche which is the herd mentality. Everyone becoming reduced to the same, and anyone who feels different becomes mad. I mean, this is profoundly emblematic of Madness and Civilization, where Foucault is talking about the fact that those that don't comply become treated as mad, and thus they enter into asylums where they are put to labor to act out these virtue concepts of, oh, the good man should be reformed through hard work and labor, that this is how we subdue people. And really we can see the birth of this big distrust of boundaries that is stressed by all of postmodernism. Now, as the narrative progresses, the tightroper ends up falling off of his tightrope right at Zarathustra's feet, and Zarathustra picks him up and he takes him on his journey with him. And eventually he gets to this point where it's night, and Zarathustra says, "Truly Zarathustra has made a fine catch of fish today. It is not a man he has caught, but a corpse. Human life is uncanny and as yet without meaning. A jester may be fatal to it. I want to teach men the sense of their existence, the Übermensch, the lightning out of the dark cloud of man." And in this sense, Zarathustra is acting out a very Jesus-like tendency of, Jesus wants to be friends with the least, with the poor and the sick and the outcast and whatnot. And so too, Zarathustra wants to be with the dead. He wants to have this encounter with the dead. And for him, this is living out what it is to be the Übermensch, to come in profound contact with the dead. Zarathustra eventually ends up going to sleep, and he wakes up, and the text says, "For a long time Zarathustra slept, and not only dawn passed over his face, but also the morning. At last, however, his eyes opened, and amazed he gazed into the forest and the stillness. Amazed he gazed into himself. Then he rose quickly, like a seafarer who suddenly sees the land, and he shouted for joy, for he saw a new truth, and thus he spoke to his heart. An insight has come to me. I need companions, living ones, not dead companions and corpses, which I carry with me where I please. But I need living companions who will follow me because they want to follow themselves, wherever I please. An insight has come to me. Not to the people is Zarathustra to speak, but to companions. There, Zarathustra shall not be the shepherd and a dog of a herd." That's a reference to Jesus. "To lure many from the herd, for that I have come. The people and the herd shall be angry with me. Zarathustra wants to be called a robber by the shepherds. Shepherds, I say, but they call themselves the good and just. Shepherds, I say, but they call themselves believers in the true faith. Behold the good and the just. Whom do they hate most? The man who breaks their tablets of values, the breaker, the lawbreaker. He, however, is the creator. Behold the believers of all faiths. Whom do they hate most? The man who breaks their tablets of values, the breaker, the lawbreaker. He, however, is the creator. Companions the creator seeks, not corpses, and not herds or believers either. Fellow creators the creator seeks, those who write new values on new tablets. Companions the creator seeks, and fellow reapers, for everything about him is ripe for the harvest. But he lacks 100 sickles, so he plucks ears of corn and is annoyed. Companions the creator seeks, and such as know how to whet their sickles. Destroyers they will be called, and despisers of good and evil, but they are the reapers and rejoicers. Fellow creators Zarathustra seeks. Fellow reapers and fellow rejoicers Zarathustra seeks. What has he to do with herds and shepherds and corpses? And you, my first companion, the corpse, farewell. I have buried you in your hollow tree. I have hidden you well from the wolves. But I part from you. The time has arrived. Between dawn and dawn, a new truth has come to me. I am not to be a shepherd. I am not to be a gravedigger. Never again shall I speak to the people. For the last time have I spoken to the dead. I shall join the creators, the reapers, and the rejoicers. I shall show them the rainbow and all the steps to the Übermensch. To the hermits I will sing my song, to the loathsome and the twosome, and to him who still has ears for the unheard. I will make this heart heavy with my happiness. To my goal will I go, on my own way. Over those who hesitate and loiter I shall leap. Thus let my going be their going under. And this is Nietzsche's, I think this is just a wonderful passage for getting at Nietzsche's transvaluation of values, because Nietzsche wants to essentially be creative. He talks about being a creator. This is the same desire for newness of Deleuze and Guattari. But in order to do this, Nietzsche has to be critical. And this is just like all the postmodernists. I mean, a common criticism is that they're really good at critiquing stuff, but they're not good at telling us where to go. That's a whole nother discussion. Well, we can certainly see Nietzsche's, at the very least, a sophisticated and advanced critic of values. And he's getting back to this encounter where the self and nature are not opposed to one another, but rather they are shown to be the same profoundly through the space that is their sight to one another, their encounter with one another that happens through action. Like he talks about staring into the stillness and being amazed to see into himself. That essentially nature and the self become one and the same when we realize that they are both operating on the same principles. They establish these places of territory and rule-boundness at some points, but nature is just great at surpassing these limits and becoming its own. I mean, it's uncanny and it's undefinable, like he talked about human life earlier. And Zarathustra makes a drastic change here where no longer is he simply, he doesn't want to talk to the corpses because the corpse is the lost cause, the dead concept that is simply a one-way street. Really, we could think of this as object-based ontology that looks at this big difference between subjects and objects. This is like Descartes, and he's doing his philosophy of doubt, where he tries to doubt everything that's possible until he can get to something he can't doubt, which he figures out is the cogito. But he's talking about tables and chairs and all these objects and creates this radical disconnect. And Nietzsche is critical of this because this treats philosophy as a dead concept, something that can be done in the abstract without having to have a profound relationship to action. And this is why Nietzsche is so keen on art and poetry and music. I mean, Nietzsche was great friends with Richard Strauss, who wrote the piece, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, based on this work to give one that encounter in the audio sphere rather than simply reading it too. And this expresses Nietzsche's desire for a living philosophy that occurs between companions, between things that engage in an encounter together, not a one-sided encounter, because that's the problem with Hegel's philosophy too, is Hegel takes all difference as mere appearance and that in reality, everything is the one already. And in that sense, the horizon that is ahead of us, that is the whole point of Hegel's ontology, is to get to a point where through our analyzation of becomings of various things, of concepts changing over time and us sublating this difference, we get to a point where everything is just the same. We've rationalized everything to subdue it It's an essentially totalitarian and fascistic impulse. And Nietzsche's profoundly discomforted by this because it's not really philosophy anymore. It takes philosophy out of the realm of the encounter and into a rule-based discourse that is profoundly disconnected from human life. And that's why Nietzsche is so amazing, is that he's profoundly concerned with encountering the human through philosophy precisely by exploding all these boundaries and concepts. And he wants to lure people from the herd. He wants to take this crowd and find those who are willing to enter into an encounter. And this is the freedom that, die fröhliche Wissenschaft, the gay science, the happy science. It's all about this happiness that comes through the creativity and the freedom of embracing one's agency. And he talks about taking people out of the crowd ruled over by the shepherds. And the shepherds are really, these are your despots, your statesmen, your rulers, your subduers, your moralists who are preaching a virtue and telling you various ought statements. He's like, no, they call themselves the good and just. They call themselves believers of the true faith. And he wants to be seen as a robber to these people precisely because he recognizes that what rules hate the most is that which breaks their values. The lawbreaker, who is therefore a creator by breaking the law, by breaking past these boundaries, that is how one achieves freedom. And of course, this doesn't mean just turning into anarchists. Nietzsche was very anti-statist, but nevertheless, he's talking about going under, about coming to talk to people. He's not just engaged in this thing where he's like, oh, any encounter is going to be structured and thus I shouldn't engage in it. Rather, he's going to say any encounter that we do engage upon where there are these clear categories, we approach them precisely to take advantage of them and to mold them and shape them and cut them and thus destroy these tablets of values. And he wants fellow reapers. He says that they will be called destroyers, but really what they are is creators. Essentially, through the destruction of values, this will build up a post-humanist project, which is simply engaged with bringing things together in breaking down these binaries and engaging with a philosophy of action where we're not so much worried about herds anymore, but rather we're worried about engaging on this horizon together through creative processes. As the prologue comes to a close, Zarathustra looks into the sky and there's an eagle going in circles, and hung around its neck is a serpent, not as prey, but as a friend, for she kept herself coiled around the eagle's neck. And Zarathustra says that these are his animals, that they have come out to search, as he says, not to create rules, but to search together. This freedom of the eagle with the destructive serpent as that force around the eagle's neck, because, the serpent is kind of this conniving, destructive force in Genesis. And Zarathustra says, they want to know whether Zarathustra still lives. Truly, do I still live? I have found life to be more dangerous among men than among animals. On dangerous paths walks Zarathustra. Let my animals lead me. When Zarathustra had said this, he remembered the words of the saint in the forest. Then he sighed and spoke thus to his heart. Would that I were wiser. Would that I were wise from the very ground, like my serpent. But I'm asking the impossible. Therefore, I ask my pride to go always with my wisdom. And if my wisdom should someday forsake me, it loves to fly away. May my pride then fly with my folly. He is no longer worried about knowledge seeking as something prideful, but knowledge seeking as an encounter that is inevitably going to result in not being able to necessarily achieve that horizon. As he says, this process is one of becoming and not being the Übermensch, but becoming the Übermensch through the encounter with nature. And thus the prologue comes to a close. Now he speaks of these three metamorphoses, how the spirit becomes a camel, the camel a lion, and the lion at last a child. And this is, Nietzsche loves to talk about his animals just like Plato did. And essentially these three different points, for the spirit to become the camel, it enters into this desert where it decides to carry its load on its back, to take its virtues and enter into the wilderness, to enter into some kind of encounter. Where the camel becomes a lion, the lion is this image of freedom, because in this desert, there is this radical freedom and self-mastery that occurs, which is essentially nihilistic. He says, but in the loneliest wilderness, the second metamorphosis occurs. Here the spirit becomes a lion who would conquer his freedom and be master in his own desert. Here he seeks his last master. He wants to fight him and his last god. For final victory, he wants to fight with the great dragon. So there's still this teleological thing in front of him that he never really reaches, and thus it's quite nihilistic because it's freedom in a desert that is unrelenting. But the best part is becoming the child. He says, to create new values, that even the lion cannot accomplish, but to create freedom for oneself for new creating, that the might of the lion can do. To create freedom for oneself and give a sacred no even to duty. For that, my brothers, the lion is needed. So here the lion is, we could see it as merely the negative philosophy, as that which gives a resounding no to rules and uses this to come to some kind of freedom. He says, to assume the right to new values, that is the most terrifying assumption for a reverent spirit that would bear much. Truly to him it is praying and the work of a beast of prey. He once loved thou shalt as most sacred. Now he must find illusion and arbitrariness even in the most sacred things, that he may steal his freedom from his love. The lion is needed for such prey. Again, just saying no to having values imposed on one. Saying no to illusory and arbitrary rules, which Nietzsche is going to talk about later as profoundly selfish and debasing those who will come to be deemed lesser. But then he says, but say, my brothers, what can the child do that even the lion could not do? Why must the praying lion still become a child? The child is innocence and forgetting, a new beginning, a game, a self-propelled wheel, a first movement, a sacred yes saying. Yes for the game of creating, my brothers. A sacred yes saying is needed. The spirit now wills his own will, and he who had been the world's outcast now conquers his own world. And this is the point where Nietzsche finds creativity. as opposed to the merely negative philosophy that is going to merely be a destroyer. It's that which engages with creative experience, with the arts, with nature, with poetry, with music, with whatever it may be, in order to be a game, a self-propelled wheel. It's not rule-bound, because, I mean, you cannot find one thing that all games have in common. This is kind of like with Wittgenstein's idea of the language game, that all languages don't have anything in common. They're game-like. They have some kind of structure, but it can't really be transmuted to every other language. And even between words, their meaning, it's kind of a game. It's this strange assemblage made through this creative process, which children often do. And this is why he's talking about the child, because the child just tinkers, and they just worry about processes of desire. They do what they desire. They say yes to encounters because they're not quite as conceited as someone who's old and knows their values. For that reason, Nietzsche's not too fond of getting old, because he's like, that means getting conceited with it. In this sermon called On the Afterworldly, the Hinterwelt, he gives us a really great criticism of the transcendent, because really this is one of the biggest revolutions for Nietzsche, is no transcendence, no soul that is disconnected from in der Welt sein processes, these in the world beings. He says, good and evil and joy and pain and I and you, colored smoke they seem to me before creative eyes. The Creator wanted to look away from himself, so he created the world. It is drunken joy for the sufferer to look away from his suffering and lose himself. Drunken joy in loss of self did the world once seem to me. This world, eternally imperfect, the image of an eternal contradiction, an imperfect image, a drunken joy to its imperfect creator. Thus did the world once seem to me. I mean, he just, really, it's absurdist in a way. He's like, look, this world is imperfect. It's as if it was created by someone who is just drunk on their own joy to impose binaries. He says, thus at one time, I also cast my fancy beyond man, like all afterworldly. Beyond man indeed? Ah, you brothers, that God whom I created was humanly made madness, like all gods. Man he was, and only a poor fragment of man and his I. Out of my own ashes and glow it came to me, that ghost, and truly, it did not come to me from beyond. And this is profoundly connected to Feuerbach, who says that, I mean, even when he's talking about divine revelation, he's like, God cannot talk to us except in human terms. And in this sense, it can only talk about us through things that are already inside us. I mean, if it wasn't inside us already, we wouldn't be able to understand it, because it would be that which is not us, and it would be radically disconnected from us. And thus, the emanations that are gods are humanly made madness. These things that didn't come from beyond, but rather come out of one's own ashes. It was suffering and impotence that created all afterworlds, and that brief madness of bliss which is experienced only by those who suffer most deeply. Weariness which seeks to get to the ultimate with one leap, with one death leap. A poor, ignorant weariness, unwilling even to will any longer. That created all gods and afterworlds. And this is a consistent theme, is he's like, look, you people who created the afterworld, it's just because you were so discontented with this world and your desires were telling you you needed some way to get out of this suffering, and it was created in this madness of bliss to entertain these fancies of getting beyond what's here. And this creates a second madness that is experienced by those who suffer the most deeply. Those are the ones that have the highest emanations of God. And thus it's quite clear why plenty of people can be profoundly tortured and they won't lose their belief in God. In a sense, it becomes grounding at a point. And I mean, he calls this a death leap. And this is very Baudrillardian, that basically this positing of the other world debases the world such that we are essentially living in a mode of death, that we are already dead by positing that there is another life beyond this one. And Nietzsche's like not very happy with this because he thinks that this is just a weak move. He says, "Believe me, my brothers, it was the body that despaired of the body. It groped with the fingers of a deluded spirit at the ultimate walls. Believe me, my brothers, it was the body that despaired of the earth. It heard the belly of being speaking to it. And then it sought to get through these ultimate walls with its head, and not only with its head, over there to that world. But that world is well concealed from humans, that dehumanizing, inhuman world, which is a heavenly nothing. And the belly of being does not speak to man except as man. Truly it is hard to prove all being and hard to make it speak. Tell me, you brothers, is not the strangest of all things best proved? Yes, this I, with its contradiction and perplexity, speaks most honestly of its being. This creating, willing, valuing I, which is the measure and value of all things." And again, sounds exactly like Feuerbach. Feuerbach is saying we have this sense of self inside of us, and we are engaged with nature. We are dependent upon nature, and as such, we start to feel a sense of inferiority in the face of nature, and thus the most early religions come about as a form of reverence. And Feuerbach is like, okay, this is actually kind of good. We have these early forms where ritual forms of practice keep us contacted with nature and in a state of reverence. But when we tried to create a realm beyond nature, now this reverence turns into pity, which is something Nietzsche doesn't like. And Nietzsche says that this other world is just this heavenly nothing, that this world only speaks to us as us, which is to say that this world in its objective sense is no different from the desire within us, which begs for it. And thus, this measure of all things is a profoundly selfish valuing I, this sense of self that must impose its values on other things. Beyond the sphere of their body and this earth, they now fancied themselves transported, these ungrateful ones. But to what did they owe the convulsion and rapture of their transport? To their body and this earth. So they're trying to posit this beyond realm, but what is the origin of this beyond realm? The here realm, the self that made it. Zarathustra is gentle with the sick. Truly he is not indignant at their kind of consolation and ingratitude. May they become convalescents and overcomers and create higher bodies for themselves. Creation, we see, is right there. That the higher body is not something achieved from without, but rather something achieved from within, an act of spontaneous creation. Neither is Zarathustra indignant at a convalescent who looks tenderly on his own delusions, and at midnight steals round the grave of his God. But even so, his tears still betray a sickness and a sick body to me. This yearning, just like Feuerbach, this yearning for the beyond expresses an important condition. It is not only possibly a dissatisfaction with the suffering that is in the earth that mixes with our desire for there to be objective, for suffering to be an objectively bad thing and for our well-being to be an essentially good thing, that this discord is present in this impulse, and that as such, Zarathustra isn't indignant to this fact. This is something that has to be dealt with. This is a part of our condition. Many sick ones have there always been among those who muse and languish for God. Violently they hate the lover of knowledge in that youngest among the virtues, which is called honesty. They always gaze backwards toward dark ages. Then indeed delusion and faith were something different. The rage of reason was godlikeness, and doubt was sin. So, right, we take that which we want to be, and we turn it into an edifice that we've achieved through reason. And of course, if you're critical of Hegel at all, you know why one might be suspicious of reason, because it establishes these concepts that are completely outside of the real. They're these transcendental concepts that might as well not exist because they're so detached. And thus we turn reason into our God. Feuerbach says this exactly, that which is called God is reason. And doubt in this reason, doubt in these territories that gets established, turns into sin, turns into badness at its very core. Truly not in afterworlds and redeeming drops of blood, but in the body they also believe most, and their own body is for them their thing in itself. Which is, they pretend to be preaching of the beyond, but there is a profound, desire for blood. Think of the Crusades and the expansion of the Islamic Caliphate, and all of these religious wars that happen. We could think of religious wars regarding the state of Nepal, right? Even within Buddhism, which is seen as a very peaceful religion, there is nevertheless this encounter with blood, which is it's something that Nietzsche uses throughout. Blood is emblematic of the natural, of that encounter that is pretended like it's ignored, but in fact, the body is deemed the thing in itself, because the body is turned into that which is affirmed by the beyond. But it is a sickly thing to them, and gladly would they get out of their skin. Therefore they listen to the preachers of death, and themselves preach afterworlds. Listen rather, my brothers, to the voice of the healthy body. It is a more honest and purer voice. More honestly and purely speaks the healthy body that is perfect and perpendicular, and it speaks to the meaning of the earth. We can see that really this preaching of the afterworld comes about with a profound dissatisfaction with this world. And just like Deleuze and Guattari say in Anti-Oedipus, that a schizophrenic out for a walk is a better model for us than that sits on the analyst's couch. That if we want to figure out what do we actually desire, or what really is, we have to analyze something that is focused on encountering reality rather than effacing it into an afterworld. And this idea of being perpendicular, Deleuze and Guattari take this word for word when they're talking about the line of flight. We have the plane of consistency, and the line of flight juts out perpendicular to the plane of consistency and creates a new creative direction that just cannot be accounted for on a system that exists on a plane. He talks about these people called the despisers of the body, and he says, but the awakened one, the knowing one, says, body am I entirely and nothing more, and soul is only the name of something about the body. The body is a great reason, a plurality with one sense, a war and a peace, a herd and also a shepherd. An instrument of your body is also your little reason, my brother, which you call spirit. a little instrument and toy of your great reason. I, you say, and are proud of that word. But the greater thing, in which you are unwilling to believe, is your body with its great reason. It says not I, but does it. What the sense feels, what the spirit discerns, never has its end in itself. But sense and spirit would like to persuade you that they are the end of all things. That is how vain they are. And this is just Hegel tries to do this in his ontology, where he says, ultimately, everything is one undifferentiated substance. And therefore, at rock bottom, to say anything about anything is a tautology. It's like saying, I am I. You just use, it's like circular logic. It just uses the same term and repeats it. And, for Hegel, alles ist Geist. Everything is spirit. And thus, essentially, for Hegel, everything is a tautology. Everything has its end in itself. But Nietzsche's like, not only is this just philosophically dumb, because, if you read Hegel, you should know the problem with this, because if I can only talk about something by referencing to it, just saying its name over and over and over, I can't actually say anything at all, because language depends on difference. Identity depends on differences created. And thus, Nietzsche is focusing on multiplicity. That we have the body here, we have this material realm, and the soul is merely the name of a concept created by the body. And the body is a great reason of sorts, but it's a plurality. It's a herd and a shepherd. It is that which follows the rules, but also that which makes the rules. And that is the precise freedom, is not making your own rules because they are absolute rules. No. You merely tarry with the world and you use your rules to kind of slip in and out like the serpent and find your way through encounters. And this, which is called spirit, it's just an instrument. Really, it can be seen as an instrument of violence, right? Because it can make people do crazy things in the name of the 72 virgins in the beyond. And the important part about this, which is essentially Deleuzian, is he speaks of the I. And sometimes this gets translated as the ego, but that might not necessarily be the right term. It's ich, the I as the concept of the self. And instead of thinking about the I, he wants to talk about this greater thing where the body, its great reason is, it doesn't say the I, but it does the I. The subject is not a static concept, but it is essentially action-oriented. It is dynamic in its very being. In terms of the preachers of death, this feels very much like Baudrillard, because Baudrillard is like, look, when we try to pretend like death doesn't exist anymore, like we've gotten beyond it, like we're essentially immortal, we're only showing how enraptured we are with death. And we often hear this to atheists that, oh, you're just mad at God, and that's why you're an atheist. And really, in this sense, Nietzsche turns this around to say something like, you're angry with the earth, so you create God. He says, the creating self created respect and contempt. It created pleasure and pain. The creative body created a spirit as a hand for its will. Even in your folly and contempt, you each serve yourself. you despisers of the body. I tell you, yourself itself wants to die and turns away from life. He's like, look, the people who are talking about this beyond, they're serving their body. And by positing this beyond, they're doing, this is a thing of asceticism where you retract yourself from sexual activity, from drinking, from worldly pleasures, and you do this to enter into this contact with the beyond. But in doing this, Feuerbach says this creates the beyond by creating this space between the human and the beyond, by debasing oneself. And he's like, look, y'all are just despisers of the body. You just want to die, and you're addressing it in fluffy language. He says, no longer can yourself do that which it desires most, to create beyond itself. That is why it would do above all else. That is its fervent desire, the desire to create. This is what creates God. And really the criticism can be not you shouldn't create things, but you shouldn't create things that are said to create you. Because it's precisely the other way around. Humans are, as Deleuze and Guattari would call them, desiring machines. Everything is desiring machines, engaged in these productive processes. And, as he goes on, but it is now too late to do so. So yourself wants to go under, you despisers of the body. To go under, so wishes yourself, and therefore you have become despisers of the body. For you can no longer create beyond yourselves. And therefore now you are angry with life and with the earth. An unconscious envy is in the squint-eyed glance of your contempt. The person here wants to enter into an encounter with the earth, but even Deleuze and Guattari are ready to admit this, that this style of being, of encountering things, it's not always pleasant, and it's not always an easy position to be in. And Nietzsche's like, look, some people aren't going to be strong enough to do it. Some people just want to be good rule followers, and they would love to just be told told how long they're going to live, when they're going to die, where they're going, and that makes them happy. But Nietzsche says this portrays the desire to be creative. It takes people and says, you know what you are? You're children of God. And what does that mean? It means you fit into these little boxes. Nietzsche's like, no, these boxes were created. These boxes are always created with transcendental terms. And if we get rid of these transcendental terms, suddenly the boxes disappear. Suddenly we can be creative by being a little brave and entering into these encounters where we just dive head first. Nietzsche does talk about virtue to an extent, but he talks about, really Nietzsche's conception of virtue is something that's fleeting. It's earthly, it's productive, it's creative, it's not high, it's not asceticism, it's not religious. He says, you would do better to say, ineffable and nameless is that which is agony and sweetness to my soul, and is even the hunger of my entrails. That which I desire, that which is agonist to me, and that which is sweetness to me, it's ineffable, it's nameless, it's not something that is a concept. Let your virtue be too exalted for the familiarity of names, and if you must speak of her, then do not be ashamed to stammer about her. Then speak and stammer, this is my good, this do I love, thus does it please me entirely, thus only do I desire the good. I do not want it as a divine law. I do not want it as a human law or a human need. It shall not be a signpost for me to over earths and paradises. This idea of the good, it's not indicative of any higher place. It's indicative of the I want, the I desire, and this is my good. That this is something I exalt to try to come into contact with. What do I really want? What do I desire? He says, it is an earthly virtue that I love. There is little prudence in it, and least of all the reason of every man. But this bird built its nest with me. Therefore I love and caress it. Now it dwells with me, sitting on its golden eggs. Then you shall stammer and praise your virtue. That to be, he's not concerned with morality. He's concerned with action. And action is necessarily going to be aimed at, forms of desire, of virtue, of what you're going to do and what you want to do. And he's like, this is what you should praise. You should be concerned with not making your desire, as he says, a signpost for over-earths and paradises. That when you do this, you essentially make sure that you are being despotic to somebody. Instead, you stammer about your virtue. You embrace it in its subjectivity. And he is not too fond of judges. He talks about these judges. He says, listen, you judges, there is yet another madness, and it comes before the deed. You have not yet crept deep enough into this soul. Thus speaks the red judge. Why did this criminal commit murder? He meant to rob. I tell you, however, that his soul wanted blood, not robbery. He thirsted for the bliss of the knife. And this makes a big distinction between action, which is morally neutral, and morality, which is value-laden. That there is a difference between robbing and blood and killing. One of these is neutral and is merely a form of expressing a desire. And I want to do something and I do it. And Nietzsche's like, this is the kind of stuff that happens. What someone does is someone kills. Someone thirsts for blood. What someone doesn't do is rob or, these things that have values attached to them. That instead, it's just people trying to do things. He says, but his poor reason did not understand this madness, and it persuaded him, what matters blood? It said, don't you want at least to commit a robbery with it or take revenge? And he listened to his poor reason. Its words lay upon him like lead. So he robbed when he murdered. He did not want to be ashamed of his madness. And this is profoundly Foucauldian, because Foucault is like, look, we're all a little mad. And precisely when we think we're getting rid of madness by confining it to asylums and institutions, that's precisely when we show our interdependence with madness. And Nietzsche basically says that this feeling of guilt, this is something manufactured by things like judges and state apparatuses that make us feel bad for certain behaviors. And this person wants to do something, like they want blood, and these voices come into the back of the head that say, no, you want to rob someone, you want to do something evil. And there's this kind of discord that goes on in the head. But this person doesn't want to be ashamed of his madness. Because, of course, one is not mad. One is made mad. One is convinced to be mad. Without that, one is simply an agent of action. He says, and now once more the lead of his guilt lies upon him, and once more his poor reason is so stiff, so paralyzed, so heavy. If only he could shake his head, then his burden would roll off. But who shakes their head? What is this man? A pile of diseases that reach out into the world through the spirit. There they want to catch their prey. What is this man? A coil of wild serpents that are seldom at peace among themselves. So they go forth singly and seek prey in the world. That to be a human is to be this assemblage, this serpentine kind of force that moves into the world, that is essentially mad in a sense, that is a disease that encounters things. But even a disease is probably the wrong word. It would better to say proliferator, because a disease has a negative connotation behind it, right? And this is one of my favorites, is on reading and writing. And He says, of all that is written, I love only what a man has written with his blood. Write with blood, and you will find that blood is spirit. Which is to say, because, blood is this way of talking about the earthly, the stuff that's not the spirit, but it's the stuff of nature. That this is what one writes with, that one acts with, is the earthly. He's not literally saying write in blood. He's not necessarily like saying, let's go start a war. But what he's saying is, we must make of our emanations something which is deeply connected to us and natural. He says, whoever writes in blood and aphorisms does not want to be read, but to be learned by heart. And the mountains, the shortest way is from peak to peak, but for that one must have long legs. Aphorisms should be peaks, and those who are addressed tall and lofty. The atmosphere rare and pure, danger near, and the spirit full of a gay malice. These go well together. This idea of being freux, gay, of being happy, and not embarking on knowledge seeking necessarily, insofar as knowledge is something to be apprehended, but rather knowledge which is merely the derivative of action, of being learned by heart. It's not about being read, but being encountered. I know I'm going to say that word a million times, but the encounter is the critical part. What do we have in common with the rosebud, which trembles because a drop of dew lies on it? And this drop of dew is in reference to those who create the otherworldly because life is so hard to bear. That this is like a drop bearing down on a rosebud. It is true, we love life, not because we are used to living, but because we are used to loving. There is always some madness in love, but there is always also some reason in madness. And to me also, as I am well disposed toward life, butterflies and soap bubbles and whatever among men is of their kind seem to know most about happiness. To see these light, foolish, pretty, lively little souls flutter, that seduces Zarathustra to tears and songs. I would believe only in a God who could dance. And when I saw my devil, I found him serious, thorough, profound, and solemn. He was the spirit of gravity. Through him all things fall. Not by wrath does one kill, but by laughter. Come, let us kill the spirit of gravity. I learned to walk, ever since I let myself run. I learned to fly, ever since I do not want to push before moving along. Now I am light, now I fly, now I see myself beneath myself, now a God dances through me. Which is to say, to become God, that's not even really the right term, but rather simply to become is to be engaged with creative activity, with dancing, with being disposed toward life like butterflies and soap bubbles, right? They meander and they don't follow a reason. In a sense, and this is the paradoxical thing, they have a reasoned composure through laws of physics like this and things that we use to talk about nature in a coherent way, but they also are profoundly chaotic and unpredictable. And in the same way, there's this paradox, a dialectic is not even the right word, but this paradox between reason and madness, or love and madness. There's always a little bit of both. And if you try to just go to love and pretend like madness doesn't exist, well, you're actually just showing how mad it is to have love in itself. Love itself is a little mad, and madness itself is a little loving. That there has to be this unity between the two where you don't put value judgments on things. You simply act. And this brings one to tears and song. And that when you see your devil, you could think of this as that thing which you see as wrong, you take it seriously and see it as profound and solemn. It's a spirit of gravity. It's that which creates order. And thus, when one enters into these moments where the order starts to be incumbent upon one, this can be a line of flight where one eats the apple from the tree of knowledge, or, one breaks out of this order through a line of flight, as Deleuze and Guattari would call it. And I love this line. He says, some souls one will never discover unless one invents them first. And this is so postmodernist, because postmodernists refuse to take seriously this idea of transcendental terms that stand before the social. Judith Butler calls this pre-social ontology. The idea that things have an essence and an isness before they interact with other things and become social beings. Rather, to be a soul, to be a thing, one has to invent, one has to create before that even makes sense. Similar to Deleuze and Guattari, who are going to talk about, okay, you entertain these forms of territory and you find ways of breaking and molding and changing the territory from within, and you essentially become nomad, right? Nomads have a structure in a sense, but really what it is to be nomad, just like what it is to be a river, is to be meandering, to become, to advance beyond territory. The river has a territory precisely insofar as the river will entrench upon that territory. It will erode its boundaries. It will change its shape over time. Its water level will flood and go beyond. Each particle of water will essentially fight the tendency to be in one position. And the same thing for the nomad, which is going to break out of territoriality, because that's not how the nomad works. The nomad tinkers with different spots and finds places to find food, and thus is profoundly engaged with what it means to exist and to be. Nietzsche says, you shall seek your enemy, you shall wage your war, and for the sake of your thoughts. And if your thoughts are vanquished, then your honesty should still find triumph in that. You shall love peace as a means to new wars, and the short peace more than the long one. And it's important to note that he says prior to this, I know of the hatred and envy of your hearts. You are not great enough not to know hatred and envy. Then be great enough not to be ashamed of them. And if you cannot be saints of knowledge, at least be its warriors. They are the companions and forerunners of such sainthood. So this part is called On War and Warriors, but Nietzsche makes clear, if you cannot be saints of knowledge, at least be its warriors. And then he starts talking about all this war and stuff. So when he talks about when your thoughts are vanquished, then your honesty should still find triumph in that. Really, this is just epistemic humility. It's saying, you know what? I didn't know this, and you proved me wrong. Thus, I advance in my territory. I engage in this process where I love peace, but only as a means, peace being stable, rule-bound territory, only as a means to new wars, to new changes in territory, which are going to create a dynamic field in which to be. And I just love what Nietzsche says about the state in this called On the New Idol. And this new idol is the state that has taken the place of God. It, in a sense, maintains the same despotic order whereby one is reduced to a constituent, a citizen, a rule follower for the sake of following rules which one didn't really decide. And he says, state, what is that? Well, now open your ears to me, for now I shall speak to you about the death of peoples. State is the name of the coldest of all cold monsters. Coldly it tells lies too, and this lie crawls from its mouth. I, the state, am the people. It's a lie. It was creators who created peoples and hung a faith and a love over them. Thus they served life. It is destroyers who lay traps for the many and call them state. They hang a sword and 100 cravings over them. That essentially the state is not consistent of the people, but the state takes on this higher function where it takes on a godlike structure. It defines your very being to be a citizen of a particular country, to be bound to certain rules, which often may be rather arbitrary. Maybe you think that drug laws are arbitrary, or abortion laws, or maybe you think there are certain profoundly terrifying policies like the death penalty or something like this. This is the kind of stuff that gets imposed upon one, and the little lie that's told is that this was your decision, you engaged in the social contract, you wanted this. But the state lies in all the tongues of good and evil, and whatever it says, it lies, and whatever it has stolen. Everything about it is false. It bites with stolen teeth, this biter. Even its entrails are false. The state it's a made-up apparatus that uses good and evil. It uses the sense of what it means to be a citizen under the law, what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be sane, all these different concepts to overdetermine what you are to be. How are you to be governed? How are you to be a good rule follower? It's like Nietzsche would say, well, this is presupposing we should even be following your rules in the first place. Nietzsche says, on earth there is nothing greater than I. It is I who am the ordering finger of God. Thus roars the monster, the state. And not only the long-eared and the short-sighted fall upon their knees. Ah, even in your ears, you great souls, it whispers its dark lies. It detects the rich hearts which like to squander themselves. Yes, it detects you too, you vanquishers of the old God. You've grown weary of fighting, and now your weariness serves the new idol. It would surround oneself with heroes and honorable ones, the new idol. It basks happily in the sunshine of good conscience, the cold monster. It will give you everything if you worship it, the new idol. Thus it purchases the luster of your virtue and the look of your proud eyes. It would use you as a bait for the all too many. Yes, a hellish artifice has here been devised, a death horse jingling with the trappings of divine honors. Yes, a dying for many has here been devised, which glorifies itself as life. Truly a great service to all the preachers of death. State, I call it, where all drink poison, the good and the bad. State, where all lose themselves, the good and the bad. State, where the slow suicide of all is called life. That there's this particular sense in which, we like order in a sense. It's comfortable. We're told that we ought to what? That we ought to want order, but really, order is very convenient for those who wish to dominate you, right? And those who wish to give you these ad hoc explanations of, this is what you wanted all along. You wanted to be dominated, just like the husband is going to say to his wife who is forced to never be able to have a job outside of the home. And you, in a sense, surround yourself with the state. In a sense, you enter into a false encounter, a false sort of acceptance of, oh, this is what I really wanted. And thus there is created, who can look at the US and not see something profoundly religious? People treat the American flag like an idol and treat the Constitution like the next gospel. And this is used to bait us into what he calls a death horse that has all the same things as divine honors, just put in a different lens. And that it detects these old vanquishers of the old God, and it just puts things in a new light. And dying has been devised, that we have entered into a state where, think about mass reproduction in factories, where the same thing gets produced over and over and over. For Baudrillard, that is society as a whole. And thus, this is the slow suicide of all, turning us into pure, abstract, reproducible concepts instead of living by passing these boundaries. He talks about these superfluous people, and he says, "See them clamber, these nimble monkeys. They clamber over one another and thus tumble one another into the mud and the deep. They all want to get to the throne. It's their madness, as if happiness sat on the throne. Often mud sits on the throne, and often also the throne on mud. Madmen they all seem to me, clambering monkeys and over-eager. To me their idol smells foul, a cold monster. To me they all smell foul, these idolaters. My brothers, do you want to suffocate in the fumes of their snouts and appetites? Rather break the windows and spring to freedom, escape from the bad smell, escape from the idolatry of the superfluous." And really, this is just a critique of pursuits in capitalism, maybe. It could be anything that is society dominated, that you're just reaching for a throne that is mud and is built on mud, and it's just this little lie that's told. Nietzsche says, escape from the bad smell, escape from the steam of these human sacrifices. The earth is free even now for great souls. There are yet many empty seats for the lonesome and the twosome, wafted by the aroma of still seas. A free life is even now free for greater souls. Truly, whoever possesses little is that much less possessed. Praise be a little poverty. And in that sense, it's definitely kind of Jesus-y, right? Trying to get rid of these connections precisely insofar as they create territory. And we come back to this valuation of all values on the 1001 Goals. And he's basically just talking about how everyone has different moral precepts, and we like to pretend like we've got the right ones. One neighbor never understood another. His soul always marveled at his neighbor's madness and wickedness. A tablet of the good hangs over every people. Behold, it is the tablet of their overcomings. Behold, it is the voice of their will to power. That these virtues that are created, these what is good, think about this in the state. What is considered the law is that which has been established as a mode of domination, as a way of pacifying possibilities for creativity. Whatever makes them rule and conquer and shine, to the dread and envy of their neighbors, that is to them the high, the first, the measure, the meaning of all things. Truly, my brother, if you only knew a people's need and land and sky and neighbor, you could surely divine the law of its overcomings and why it climbs up that ladder of its hope. Nietzsche's like, look, this is predictable. People operate through the will to power. They operate in their self-interests. They want to dominate other people. It makes them feel good. It makes them have a sense of agency. And thus, if you knew people's conditions, if you knew what it was they were trying to overcome, what environment they're in, you could probably figure out what their morality was going to be. Truly, men have given to themselves all their good and evil. Truly, they did not take it. They did not find it. It did not come to them as a voice from heaven. Only man assigned values to things in order to maintain himself. He created the meaning of things, a human meaning. Therefore, calls he himself man, that is, the evaluator. Evaluation is creation. Hear this, you creators. Valuation itself is of all valued things the most valuable treasure. Through valuation only is there value, and without valuation the nut of existence would be hollow. Hear this, you creators. Change of values, that is a change of creators. Whoever must be a creator always destroys. So Nietzsche's saying, values are something we invent. We do it to maintain ourselves. And Thus we create man with a capital M, the evaluator. And this is a form of creation. But creation should never be stagnant. Creation always comes with destroying things. He says, joy in the herd is older than joy in the eye. And as long as the good conscience is identified with the herd, only the bad conscience says I. Truly the cunning I, the loveless one that seeks its advantage in the advantage of many, that is not the origin of the herd, but its going under. Good and evil have always been created by lovers and creators. The fire of love glows in the names of all virtues and the fire of wrath. Zarathustra has seen many lands and many peoples. Zarathustra has found no greater power on earth than the works of the lovers. Good and evil are their names. Truly this power of praising and blaming is a monster. Tell me, O brothers, who will subdue it for me? Tell me, who will throw a yoke upon the 1,000 necks of this beast? Right? Good and evil are these acts of production. And what is production aimed at? Power, the will to power. And thus good and evil are both put in quotes because these are the fires of wrath. He has some interesting stuff to say on the love of the neighbor, and this is really a departure from Jesus, because he's like, look, unconditional love of neighbor is not bad, it's not immoral. The problem, because, Nietzsche's trying to get away from moral versus immoral. Rather, he says, this is a selfish impulse. This is something tells oneself. He says, you flee from yourselves to your neighbor and would like to make a virtue out of that. But I see through your selfishness. The you is older than the I. The you has been consecrated, but not yet the I. So man crowds toward his neighbor. Do I recommend love of the neighbor to you? Sooner should I recommend even flight from the neighbor and love of the farthest. Higher than love of the neighbor stands love of the furthest and the future. Higher still than the love of man, I account the love of things and ghosts. Posthumanism, right? Instead of staying inside of our bubble of humanism, of loving humankind, this is yet another divine emanation, a desire to make morality something stagnant, something that does not move and does not change. And this isn't something we should want, right? Because values change all the time. And as hard as it is to realize, think about people in Nietzsche's day looking at society today, it would probably be unfathomable, some of the stuff we entertain as regular. And as hard as it is for people today to realize, stuff that they take for granted is just going to be a triviality in the future. He says, I do not teach you the neighbor, but the friend. Let the friend be the festival of the earth to you and a foretaste of the Übermensch. I teach you the friend and his overflowing heart, but you must know how to be a sponge if you want to be loved by overflowing hearts. I teach you the friend in whom the world stands complete, a vessel of the good, the creating friend who has always a completed world to give away. And as the world unrolled itself for him, so it rolls together again for him in rings, as the becoming of the good through evil, as the becoming of purpose out of chance. Let the future and the furthest be the motive of your today. In your friend, you shall love the Übermensch as your motive. My brothers, I do not recommend to you love of the neighbor. I recommend to you love of the furthest. Which is to say, if we only love those who are our neighbors, we're just loving our in-group. This is just a animalistic tendency to stay within one's bounds and be rule-governed. Instead, we want to be a vector. It's an intensity with a direction, right? In physics, it's an arrow with a magnitude and it's got a direction that it's going. It is future aimed. And essentially, being is this vector. It's not the point the vector reaches, but it's the vector itself. He says, and beware the good and just. They would like to crucify those who devise their own virtue. They hate the lonely one. Beware also of holy simplicity. All that is not simple is unholy to it. It likes to play with fire too, and the stake. Which is kind of comical because the point is, those people who are good and just, they get mad at you when you create your own rules. But really it's because they're the ones who played with the fire, and they decide when they get to play with the fire and when you get to play with the fire. When do you get to get burned at the stake? To many men you may not give your hand, but only the paw. And I want your paw to have claws too. But the worst enemy you can meet will always be you yourself. You lie in wait for yourself in caverns and forests. Lonely one, you are going the way to yourself, and your way goes past yourself and past your 7 devils. You will be a heretic to yourself, and witch and soothsayer, and fool and doubter, and unholy one and villain. You must be ready to burn yourself in your own flame. How could you become new if you had not first become ashes? Lonely one, you are going the way of the Creator. You would create a God for yourself out of your 7 devils. Lonely one, you are going the way of the lover. You love yourself, and therefore you despise yourself as only lovers despise. The lover wants to create because he despises. What does he knows of love who has not had to despise precisely what he loved? With your goal, go into your loneliness, and with your creation, my brother, and only much later will justice limp after you. With my tears, go into your loneliness, my brother. I love him who seeks to create over and beyond himself and thus perishes. So there's a peculiar sense of being close to death, this dissolution of the self that we see extended in Deleuze and Guattari. And really, it's being involved with the vicissitudes of reality and despising oneself as something stagnant and instead going over man, right? Man is something to be overcome. And that you go past yourself through your 7 devils by turning your 7 devils into your God, by taking that which is lowly and taking advantage of it, using it to break out, and creating yourself and despising precisely that which you take to be eternal. He has some really cool stuff to say about death, and I'm just going to briefly go through some of it, but he says, free for death and free in death, able to say a holy no when there is no longer time for yes. Thus he understands death and life. That your dying may not be a blasphemy against man and earth, my friends. That is what I beg from the honey of your soul. In your dying, your spirit and your virtue should still glow like a sunset around the earth. Otherwise, your dying has turned out badly. Thus, I want to die myself, that you, friends, may love the earth more for my sake, and I want to become earth again, to have rest in her that bore me. Truly, Zarathustra had a goal. He threw his ball. Now you, friends, are the heirs of my goal. I throw the golden ball to you. Best of all, I like to see you too, my friends, throwing the golden ball. And so I still linger a little on the earth. Forgive me for that. Really, he's looking for a contact with death. Like Heidegger, who no doubt takes this from Nietzsche, for Heidegger, death is the very possibility of being itself. It's this structuring possibility that sets one's horizon for being, and thus one's being is defined by one's not yet. But it's more so making death not a blasphemy, making it a way of returning to the earth and being in profound contact. And he goes on a little bit to talk to his followers as he's about to leave the city, and he gives some parting words to them. And he says, all names of good and evil are parables, Gleichnisse, which are images, similes, parables. They do not speak out, they only hint. He who seeks knowledge of them is a fool. Which is to say, good and evil are not absolutes that one grounds in knowledge, but rather they hint. They hint at places to go. They hint at desires that are represented by those good and evils as emanations. He says, watch for every hour, my brothers, in which your spirit, Geist, wants to speak in parables. There is the origin of your virtue. Then your body is elevated and risen up. It enraptures the spirit, Geist, with delight, so that it becomes creator and valuer and lover and benefactor of all things. When your heart surges broad and full like a river, a blessing and a danger to those living near, there is the origin of your virtue. When you are exalted above praise and blame, and your will wants to command all things as the will of a lover, there is the origin of your virtue. When you despise the soft bed and what is pleasant, and cannot bed yourself far enough from the soft, there is the origin of your virtue. When you will with one will, and you call this cessation of all need necessity, there is the origin of your virtue. Truly she is a new good and evil, truly a deep murmur, and the voice of a new will, of a new well. She is power, this new virtue. She is a ruling thought, and around her a subtle soul, a golden sun, and around it the serpent of knowledge. And he's talking about this staff he was given, which is a golden staff. It's got the sun on it, and it's got a serpent around it. And the point is to despise one's territory, despise being anything other than a surging river, despising your soft bed, and focusing on the cessation of all necessity. One just becomes a proliferator, an actor. And this represents the real preaching of the earth that is, thus spoke Zarathustra. Stay true to the earth, my brothers, with the power of your virtue. Let your gift-giving love and your knowledge serve the meaning of the earth. Thus I beg and beseech thee. Do not let them fly away from earthly things and beat with their wings against eternal walls. Ah, there has always been so much virtue that has flown away. Lead like me, the flown virtue, back to the earth. Yes, back to body and life, that it may give the earth its meaning, a human meaning. 100 times so far has spirit as well as virtue flown away and blundered. All this delusion and blundering still dwells in our bodies. It has there become body and will. 100 times so far has spirit as well as virtue attempted and erred. Yes, man was an experiment. Much ignorance and error has become body in us. Right? To be man is to be essentially an experiment which flies away, but does not fly into the beyond, flies specifically into other worldly possibilities. Not otherworldly, but other space worldly. Stuff that is here and now and that dwells in bodies. Let your spirit and your virtue serve the sense of the earth, my brothers. Let the value of everything be determined again by you. For that shall you be fighters. For that shall you be creators. The body purifies itself with knowledge. Experimenting with knowledge, it elevates itself. To the discerning, all instincts become holy. In the elevated, the soul becomes gay. And essentially, life becomes a form of experimentation, right? It becomes a freeingness of merely elevating oneself as a member of the earth. There are 1,000 paths that have never yet been trodden, 1,000 hells and hidden islands of life. Man and man's earth are still unexhausted and undiscovered. This is that horizon of nature that Feuerbach talks about, that we create God to talk about our inadequacies, but really there's so much stuff we haven't even tried to get to yet. Awake and listen, you lonely ones. From the future comes winds with stealthy wing beats, and good tidings are proclaimed to delicate ears. You lonely ones of today, you that are drawing away, you shall one day be a people. Out of you who have chosen yourselves shall a chosen people arise, and out of them the Übermensch. Truly the earth shall yet become a place of healing. And even now, a new fragrance surrounds it, bringing salvation and a new hope. And this idea of the chosen people, like, do not turn this into a Nazi thing, because there's other stuff where it's like, okay, Nietzsche might be kind of saying some sexist stuff, some Nazi kind of sounding stuff. Here, he is specifically speaking of a chosen people, of those who enter on the path of becoming, on those who specifically do not ascribe to dogmatism or ideology, but break through and make the earth a space of tinkering. And this last sentiment, which I'll finish off with, profoundly expresses the anti-dogmatism sense of epistemic humility that should guide everyone, and is just so, it speaks so truly to me. Truly, I advise you, go away from me and guard yourselves against Zarathustra, and better still, be ashamed of him. Perhaps he has deceived you. The man of knowledge must not only love his enemies, he must also be able to hate his friends. One repays a teacher badly if one remains always only a student. And why do you not want to pluck at my wreath? You revere me, but what if your reverence tumbles one day? Beware that a statue does not slay you. You say you believe in Zarathustra, but what matters, Zarathustra? You are my believers, but what matter all believers? You had not yet sought yourselves, then you found me. Thus do all believers. Therefore all belief comes to so little. Now I bid you lose me and find yourselves, and only when you have all denied me will I return to you. When you have denied dogmatism, that's when you'll reach what Zarathustra is trying to say. And once again, you shall have become friends to me and children of one hope. Then I will be with you the third time, that I may celebrate the great noon with you. And this is the great noon when man stands in the middle of his road between animal and Übermensch, and celebrates his way to the evening as his highest hope. For it is the way to a new morning. Then he who goes under will bless himself for being one who goes over and beyond, and the sun of his knowledge will stand at noon for him. Dead are all gods. Now we want the Übermensch to live. At the great noon, let this be our last will. Thus spoke Zarathustra. We are focusing on being a nomad, or rather becoming a nomad, engaging nature in its confusing vicissitudes, and striving to be the Übermensch, that which is the overman, which jumps over the territory, over the normalcy of the world, and treats the noon, the horizon of the forenoon soul, like he talks about in Human All Too Human, as that which orients oneself towards creative possibilities. So I hope this has been enlightening. I know it's very thorough and long, but I hope this has given you an impetus to read Nietzsche, and I'll see you in another lecture.